Welcome to the Art Institute of Chicago. My name is Gloria Groom, and I'm the Chair and Curator of Painting and Sculpture of Europe, and it is my greatest pleasure to welcome you to the exhibition, Monet and Chicago. We are in the narthex, that means the very first room. And I love this mural. I love this blow up of about 6 inches of a painting in our collection of the water lilies, which really shows you the drying cracks, the textures, the thickness, all of the things that go into Monet's technique, which we'll be exploring further in the exhibition. Now we're in the collector's room, and this is really important because the history of Monet in Chicago is thanks to these 3 collectors, Martin A. Ryerson, Bertha and Potter Palmer, and Annie Swan Coburn. Martin A. Ryerson and his wife Carrie, he was very engaged with the museum. He was a trustee, he was president for a while, and he started collecting Monet around the time of the Columbian World's Fair in the early 1890s. Bertha Palmer and her husband Potter are probably the best known of the collectors that we have in the exhibition. They are, of course, the Palmer House Hotel, but also they were the movers and shakers in society as well as philanthropy. The last collector that we talk about is Annie Swan Coburn. We know the least about her. She wasn't involved with the museum in the same way that the Ryersons and Palmers were. But by 1910, she was collecting Impressionism. We gave her an exhibition in 1932. She died soon afterwards, and she gave her entire Impressionist collection to the Art Institute, including many Monets. Now we come to the first room of paintings in the exhibition, and this room is really focused around this painting, Apple Trees in Blossom. It was a painting that came to Chicago as part of the first solo exhibition of the artist at the Art Institute, the first time he was exhibited in a museum in the United States in 1895. And it was purchased by one of the trustees of the Union League Club, who was also involved with the Art Institute. And so from 1895, this painting has been down the street at the Union League Club, and we're delighted to have it here. In this room, we want you to slow down and look at Monet's method, look at his technique. And to do this, we're offering some of our discoveries made in the lab with our scientists, with our conservators, as we looked beneath the surface with X-rays, with infrared. And so we have 2 monitors on 2 very important paintings in our collection, the Beach at Saint Adresse and On the Seine at Bennecourt. And we walk you through some of the discoveries that you can't see, or sometimes you can see, with the naked eye. This is Gallery 4, and it's really the Paris Gallery. At this time, Monet had made a little money. He and his wife and 2 children were living in Paris near the Parc Monceau. On this side of the exhibition, we have a number of still lifes, which are exciting for us because we don't think of Monet as a still life artist. He's doing still lifes, one, to be near to home, but also because they're a ready way to make money. To me, this is one of the great discoveries of the exhibition because it's a vertical. You don't think of still lifes as being vertical. And he's showing these, the pheasants, the woodcocks, the partridge on the left, birds that were in the area, in the locale, but so amazingly painted that they seem to be alive still, even though it's a still life. And the tablecloth also, it just becomes kind of a riverscape. So you're looking at this twittering with energy and myriad strokes of paint making up what seems to be a very simple still life subject matter. So after Camille, his wife's death, Monet moves to various suburbs. He lives in cheaper places, Vautoil. And at that point, his life is much more complicated. He's now living with the wife of his former collector, Alice Hochedet, and her 6 children and his 2 children. And so he needs space, and he needs places that are much cheaper than you can find in Paris. And so that's what this room is. It's around Paris. It's the wonderful Ile-de-France, the rolling countryside, the orchards. And over here, we have the largest painting, perhaps in the exhibition, besides the water lily paintings. And it is, I don't even know how to describe it. It is a painting in motion. It is as if he tried to capture the atmospheric effects, but for the people as well. And it's so directional and so gestural and so unfinished. And that's what makes it really interesting, because it's ambitious. He wanted it to be for something. It shows Alice Hochedet, his soon-to-be wife in 1892, one of his children under this awning outdoors, mixing a family scene, but now out of doors with these crazy awnings, this garish color, and then he just kind of leaves it. Before we leave this room, I'd like to turn back around and look at this vertical, which is always interesting in Monet's work because he doesn't do that many vertical canvases of the boats at Fécamp. And this is a painting that he did in Normandy, but it's also a painting that is a promised gift to the Art Institute. So once again, the generosity of our early collectors continues throughout our history. As you move into this room, the first part of it represents Monet's trip to the south of France, and it's centered on Bordighera, this sun-bleached city in the far distance with the ocean behind it, but then these gnarled trees. And he writes home to Alice Hochedet about how difficult it was, how he struggled to find a place to put his canvas in the midst of all this vegetation. In the second half of this room, you have Monet going back to the Normandy coast where he was so comfortable having grown up there. And you have him working on a kind of theme and variation, often working in pairs, doing a painting with people, without people, or showing a slightly different viewpoint of the same subject, such as these 2 beach scenes, Étretat on the Normandy coast. And by this time, he was really looking for the non-picturesque. He was looking for that which was more challenging for him and without people. So he'd go to these places at the end of the tourist season when the weather was getting worse, when the wind was picking up and the boats were coming back in. Another serendipitous moment in this exhibition are these 2 paintings of the Normandy coast, the one from the Art Institute, where you see 2 figures at Pourville, and then slightly down the coast, another one, almost seems like it's painted the same day with the same sun bleach, the same glaring light, but they're both the palette, the composition, the scale, they're almost as if they were made to be pendants, and yet, of course, they've come in, one from a private collection and one that's been in our collection since 1922. This room really is the 80s, and for Monet, the 80s was a continuation of the many trips away from Giverny, and this is probably one of the most remote and sauvage areas. What makes it so special is his palette of these mauves and purples and acidic greens and yellows on these encrusted hillsides. On the far side of the room are 2 paintings that seem extraordinarily different from what we've seen, and everything about the looking for landscapes and looking for riverscapes and trying to find motifs in nature, because here we have potted plants. They were actually done with the idea of a commission. And the one we're looking at now with the dahlias was absolutely commissioned by his dealer, Paul Durel, to decorate the doors of his 18th century drawing room. So Monet did a whole series, almost 40 of these, for his dealer. But Monet's not really thinking about painting in pots. That's not his thing. He likes to be in nature. So it took him almost 3 years to complete the commission. I think his heart just wasn't in it. But the result is quite glorious. And he is adapting his normal still life practice to something that has to do with decoration and being part of an architectural interior. So in addition to going to the south of France and the Normandy coast, he went up north to Brittany. And off the coast of Brittany is Belle-Île, the beautiful island. Very much volcanic rock, no beaches whatsoever. Again, the unpicturesque. And these two paintings really speak to how different his technique could be, even when focusing on the same region. The one from the Art Institute collection is the Stillwater Day. And then on the left, you have this wonderful, tumultuous, almost drawing with a paintbrush expression of what it's like when the waves come crashing up against the same types of boulders in the ocean that you see in the calm picture. This may be the last figure painting that Monet did in his career. Certainly, it's the most familial, showing his son Michel with two of the Hochedé children, and in the background, his oldest son Jean with Blanche Hochedé, who he would eventually marry. What makes these children pop is the outlining. They're not simply embedded into the countryside. He's outlined them with this thick yellow and orange paint so that they seem to be sort of cutout figures against the background. And the colors themselves, it's just almost hypnotic. It's mesmerizing, and yet it is a family portrait. One of the tenets of Impressionism was that they had a more direct relationship with nature. Their approach to painting was not to do the preliminary drawings working towards what would be the tableau, the picture, but rather a more direct translation. But of course, Monet started, as all artists do, by sketching. And in this room, you have drawings from his early sketchbook on this wall. And this case, it's an important showcase of the documents that we have that show how big a role Monet has played in our history. And here's the album from the Ryersons that we'll see in the final room of the exhibition, where we show some of the pages of the photo album that Martin and Carrie Ryerson gave to the Art Institute. And the pages we're showing document their visit on June 4th, 1920, to Monet's Giverny home, when he went there on the behalf of the Art Institute Board of Trustees, thinking he was going to be able to buy 30 Monet paintings on behalf of the museum. But Monet did not take up his offer, and while Ryerson did buy Monet paintings throughout his life, throughout his adult life, that was not the trip. We have what I think are going to be revelatory for many visitors are the early caricatures that he did when he was still living in Normandy, Le Havre, and he did these for money. So they're the typical big-headed, small-bodied caricatures that you can see now at Montmartre, people doing those, but he was doing them of lawyers and people of importance in the city, but also people that would just pay him 15 to 20 francs. And he quipped later on that, if I had continued doing these, I'd be rich. But it's extraordinary that a young man of 15 or 16 was taking on these rather ambitious drawings. Moving into this room, once again, we have tried to open up to our audience some of the researches that we have done over the years. And this is a truly immersive experience that's a deep dive into three of the most important subjects that Monet worked on at the end of his life: the stacks of wheat, the views of London, and the water lilies. Moving away from the immersive screens, this room is really the Art Institute's crowning glory. It is our 6 stacks of wheat out of the 25 known. 6, we know he showed 15 in 1891. We know that Mrs. Potter Palmer bought 3 in 1891 and 2 more the following year, that she met Monet in 1892. So imagine not only meeting the artist, but understanding what he was trying to do when this was quite new. I mean, they were just done. And the idea of painting the same subject over and over under different climactic conditions was something that really no other artist had done at that time. They looked small and kind of mushroom or muffin-like, but they were actually 16 to 20 feet tall, so they were very much a part of the landscape, and that's what he was looking at, but doing something not to show you them as a narrative, but rather as mood-filled, as something that was symbolic of sustenance and the French countryside. The colors that were chosen for this room were to evoke the way these paintings would have looked against the brownish red velvet wall covering in the gallery of Durand-Ruel in May of 1891 when these were on exhibit, in the straight lines that you see them as we've tried to show in this gallery from our collection. This and the room with the monitors are the only 2 rooms in the exhibition where we only feature Art Institute paintings not integrated with the private collectors. And before leaving the room, you'll see a little drawing, a black chalk drawing by Monet. And as I've said, he didn't use drawings to prepare for paintings, but this is a drawing that was done after a painting in order to be photomechanically reproduced in a magazine that was advertising and reviewing this exhibition in 1891. So it's an after drawing. It's kind of a shock to walk from the stacks of wheat at Giverny into these colossal mountainous paintings of Norway. And in 1895, he went there for just a short period to visit his stepson, and he was struck by, of course, the snow, but also the difference in light, not the buttery yellow light of France, but this colder silvery light of Norway. And so he was in Oslo and he did these Mount Kolsas, which is right outside the city. The London scenes, the London series, which he began in 1899 and completed 3 years later, was introduced in the immersive screen area where you really got the sense of how he changed things. And these paintings are in our collection, and they represent just a small amount of the many, many paintings that were done on each of the series: the Charing Cross Bridge, the Waterloo Bridge, and then the Houses of Parliament. What links them together is his interest from his hotel room at the Hotel Savoy in the fog, in the atmosphere, in the dissolving of man-made and architectural structures to make them part of this effervescent and almost ethereal dreamscape. These 2 paintings, as you're leaving the room, are that wonderful coincidence where they came in from 2 different private collectors, the Ryerson and the Coburn, and they entered our collection in 1933, not knowing each other, not knowing that they'd be together, but here they are, pendants of Vautoy, the city that he often returned to, really near to Giverny. He lived there and he returned to it for some of his motifs. And again, it's that feeling of dissolving. And this time you get the sense of the city on top of the city. It's a mysterious reflection into the water where it's perfectly divided into the middle between what is real and what is in the shimmery, watery surface. Here you have a perfectly square canvas where he's playing with that decorative effect, but he's obliterated the horizon line, but yet you still get the almost like you folded the canvas in half and you have a mirror image of what you're seeing above the horizon line. It's this feeling of a foggy morning. We know he went out at 5 o'clock and he's somehow translated that fogginess and the sun coming through it with this very limited palette of lavenders and greens and blues and grays. And to me, it's one of the most exquisitely balanced paintings that he ever did. And there's so little to see, and yet it is so thickly painted. So what looks to the eye as if it was something almost watercolor applied. It's actually the result of many layers and changes underneath the surface that we know about because we've done a technical analysis. So this wandering around, this constant search for the next motif will change radically by the end of the 1890s, and that's when he really does dig in and make his home at Giverny. So in this final room of paintings, it's really celebrating Monet's, perhaps what he is most known for, the Water Lily series, which obsesses him from 1899 till the end of his life in 1926. And his property at Giverny, which he moves into in 1890, becomes for him a kind of a palette, becomes his still life. He plants the garden, he reroutes the river so that it goes by his home, he builds the wooden Japanese bridge, and then he proceeds to plant all of the foliage in the water and around the banks. And this amazing, large, encrusted painting called The Irises was purchased by the curator of modern art at the time, the Art Institute, Catherine Koo. She saw the connection between what Monet was doing with these large, immersive, abstract canvases and what was going on in avant-garde art at the time. The three canvases here are perfectly square, and where he invokes the play of light, but also the play of what happens when you see the foliage reflected into the water, and you also see the undergrowth that's coming up, and so it makes this wonderful patterned surface. You know, I think the extraordinary aspect of this exhibition is that unlike an exhibition where one starts with a thesis and asks for the works to support that thesis, this was an exhibition that was based on the generosity of our collectors then, which is our collection, and now, which is the collection we're seeing. And the way they speak to each other, these paintings, these works on paper speak to each other, is remarkable. And it also goes to show that Chicago is a city of Monet.